Okay, I'm going to go ahead and get started. Hi, everyone. My name is Kelsey Erickson Streufert. If I haven't met you before, I'm the Chief Public Affairs Officer for the Texas Restaurant Association. We are very excited to bring you a special webinar today that is exclusive for our TRA PAC contributors. I am joined by our fantastic lobby team. You hear us talk about them a lot, but you don't get to see them a lot. So here is proof they are real people that we are very grateful to have on our team. And they are going to give us an insider's look at the upcoming election and what it means for us as the Texas Restaurant Association and business folks across the state. So before we dive in, a couple housekeeping items. First, please engage with us. It will be a lot more entertaining for everyone if y'all ask questions and engage. So go ahead and drop questions in the chat or the Q&A boxes at the bottom there, and I'll be monitoring those as we go. Also, we are recording this webinar so that we can share it with all of our PAC contributors. So if you missed something or know of someone who should watch this, just make sure they sign up to contribute to the PAC this year, and we will get them the recording. So without further ado, I'm going to ask each of our lobbyists to introduce themselves. Then I'm going to kind of set the stage with kind of what we're talking about today and why it matters. And then we will dig into the latest polling and data and all things elections. So Mindy, why don't we start with you? Introduce yourself if you would.
Hello, everybody. I'm Mindy Elmer. I'm happy to be on the TRA team. I guess we're all new to the team. I was going to say I've been working for TRA for years, but I've only been working for TRA for 2 years, alongside with Kelsey and Daniel and Allison. It's a great team. Happy to be here. I'm born and raised in Austin and have spent my entire career in and around state government. So happy to be a part of the team.
Thanks, Mindy. Daniel?
I'm Daniel Hodge. I joined the TRA team about 2 years ago. But prior to that, I served as Governor Abbott's chief of staff, and I ran the Attorney General's office for him about 17 years with Governor Abbott, and now, north of 20 years in and around the Capitol. So I'm just pleased to be able to help out some of my favorite restaurants.
Thanks, Daniel. Allison?
Hi, I'm Allison Billadew. I am also thrilled to be working with TRA. It's been a couple years now too. I work with Daniel every day, and I've been in and around Texas legislature and Texas politics for 20 years as well. I have a perspective from the Texas House side. I was a staffer for a very long time, and then joined Daniel in the governor's office about 8 years ago. So, yeah.
Awesome. Thanks, Allison. So between all of us, I don't even want to do the math on how many years of experience we have between the governor's office and the legislature. We've worked in every chamber, committees, the whole deal. And I mean it when I say we really do have the best team in that building. So I'm super excited I get to work with these folks every day and excited that they get to share their expertise with us. So with that said, let's kind of talk about sort of why we're having this conversation today. I just double checked. It is officially 5 days till the general election. That's not right. That's what our countdown says, but clearly we can't do math at the TRA. November 8th is the election. So 6 days. I'm a lawyer, but I can do that math. And it's a really important election for a few reasons. One, we just went through a redistricting cycle, and that means that all of the legislative maps were redrawn and these districts are new. And so we have way more people on the ballot than we would normally have. So all of your members of the U.S. House of Congress, House of Representatives, plus our statewide races. So that's the governor, lieutenant governor, comptroller, general land office, et cetera, et cetera. And then every race in the Texas legislature, as well as many local races too. So really important election. And this election really will set the stage for the folks that we work with and what their priorities are for the next 2 to 10 years. So you've heard me say it again, you've heard me say it before, but it bears repeating. If you're watching this and you're eligible to vote, please make sure you have a plan to participate in this election. Early voting is going on right now, but you can also participate on election day. Just make sure you're prepared and you know how and who and where you're going to go to vote. So that's my stump speech for today about getting involved in electoral politics. And then, you know, why does that matter? Well, as y'all know, advocacy is a 24/7 operation. There are always proposals being put forth that could either help or hurt our business environment here in Texas. And we really focus at the state level on the Texas legislature, the governor's office, and our statewide officials. So that's going to be kind of the focus of this conversation. And as y'all know, this January is when the legislature will reconvene. We will have basically 6 months to pass bills that will help us and stop bills that will hurt us. And this is the team that really is point on all of those issues. So let's dive into the elections themselves and what we're seeing. Daniel, let's start with you. Give us kind of a big picture overview of what we're seeing in terms of polling and kind of state of play in these races right now.
Sure. So, I said a moment ago, I worked for Governor Abbott for 17 years. These numbers are not, the numbers I'm going to give you are based on publicly available information, research I've done. These are not Abbott campaign numbers. These are not O'Rourke campaign numbers. The purpose here is to give a dispassionate and mathematically valid look to you all on where I think things stand with this election. So I'm going to start with the macro level. And where we are right now is we're 8 days into early voting. So we'll go over some polling, but first I want to look at what, you know, with 8 days of election data already available to us, what do we know? So as of last night, in the top 30 counties, 2.68 million votes have been cast. So for context, in the last gubernatorial election 4 years ago, when Beto O'Rourke was also a candidate on the statewide ballot for the U.S. Senate, 3.35 million votes had been cast. So this tells us that 600,000 fewer people have voted in this election than had voted at this time 4 years ago. That tells us that voter turnout, at least so far, is down from 2018. Why does that matter? Well, it matters because the thesis of the O'Rourke campaign is sort of predicated on this notion of turning out new first-time voters to help elect him governor. Texas is historically a low propensity state in terms of voting. So the goal of the O'Rourke campaign is to turn out voters who they believe will cast a vote for Beto, and the governor's campaign, their goal is to turn out Abbott voters. If turnout is down, that suggests that Beto's turnout efforts are underperforming where he needs them to be. So now let's look at who is voting thus far in Texas. Again, in the top 30 counties, 2.68 million votes cast thus far. Of those, 44% have a Republican primary voting history, 31% have a Democratic primary voting history, and 25% have no primary voting history. Obviously, a voter who turns out to vote in the Democratic primary is more likely to vote for the Democratic candidate in the general election. Sometimes there's party switchers, but statistically, that's a number to pay attention to. So the primary voting history of a voter actually tells us a lot about who's turning out in an election. As of day 8 of early voting, 440,000 more GOP primary voters have voted in this election than their Democrat counterparts. Assuming again that a large percentage of each party's primary voters vote for their party's nominees, the Republican candidates would need only 24% of independent voters to win the statewide election. So now let's look at 2 of Texas' 5 largest counties to get a little more granular view. In the largest county, Harris County, that's Houston, Republican primary voters make up 36% of the early vote so far. For context, in 2018, Republican primary voters made up only about 25% of general election voters. So if Harris County does not account for a significant positive margin for Democratic candidates, then statewide odds of success decrease dramatically. Harris County accounts for about 14.5% of all votes in Texas. So now let's look at Travis County. Obviously, that's in Austin, and it's a very blue county. I think Governor Bush used to call it the blueberry and the tomato soup. So in 2018, Beto O'Rourke won 78%, a whopping 78% of Travis County, beating Ted Cruz by 240,000 votes. So far in this election, only 188,000 votes have even been cast in Travis County, which tells us that turnout in this deeply blue county is underperforming what the O'Rourke campaign would like to see to replicate what they did 4 years ago. One last note on a macro level. We've all seen, certainly as restaurant owners, you've seen new customers who are new to Texas, who are new to our state. How will they vote, and what does that mean for the election? After 8 days of early voting, voters who registered to vote since the 2020 general election account for about 9% of votes cast so far. Who are these people? And is there a case to be made that this is a benefit to the O'Rourke campaign? Well, we obviously won't know for sure until election day, but here's what we know right now. Of the 312,000 early votes cast by newly registered voters in the first 8 days of early voting, 28,000 more voted in the Republican primary than voted in the Democratic primary. So that's the hard data. That's where the election is 8 days in. Now let's look at polling. I'm going to start with the Real Clear Politics average. Real Clear Politics is a website that takes public polls and then averages them out. So it's a pretty good indicator actually for public polls because there's always outlier polls, and this takes the average and puts them together. Okay, so as of today, Governor Abbott has a lead of 9.2% over O'Rourke based on the Real Clear Politics average. The most recent public poll that's been released is a University of Houston Hobby School of Public Affairs poll that showed Governor Abbott leading 53 to 40% for O'Rourke. In that poll, the University of Houston poll, the top two issues for voters are crime, public safety, and inflation. Those are two issues that are more favorable to the governor than they are to O'Rourke. If the governor wins by an 8-point or more margin, then the rest of the statewide ticket is almost certain to be reelected. My guess is the lieutenant governor comes in a couple of points behind the governor, and then other statewide officials win by a couple points more than the governor. That's what we've seen in some other recent elections. One question that you may have about polling, since we talked about an average and outlier polls, is why are the numbers different from one poll to the next? Remember that a poll is only as good as its sample. If you take a customer service survey of your customers on a night when you were understaffed and you're having a problem with a cook, you're not going to get as good of a survey result as a night when you were firing on all cylinders. To use a polling example, if Kelsey does a poll of TRA members and the poll is more heavily weighted toward owners of a single restaurant, she's going to get different results on what priorities are than if she polls the entire organization. That's why the same thing will happen with a political poll. And here's an example I'll give you. About 8 or 10 days ago, there was a poll released that showed Governor Abbott leading by only 8 points. It made the race look really close. But if you start doing some research, that poll was actually commissioned by a top O'Rourke financier. It was conducted by a Democratic polling firm out of Boston, and it was intended to show a closer race to help bolster O'Rourke's fundraising going into the final stretch. That doesn't mean that their methodology of polling was any different than the other polls you've seen. It just means that they chose to increase the amount we use the term oversample, the amount of Democrats and independents who were included in the poll. The best polls out there talk about likely and very likely voters. A pollster wants to know who is very likely to vote. Now, what does that mean? Because there's a phenomenon where people do lie to pollsters. They're embarrassed that they don't vote. So then the pollster will ask about, in trying to determine that voter's propensity, what their voter history is. So when you see polls that are better for the governor, you will see polls that are focused on likely and very likely voters. When you see polls that are a little better for O'Rourke, you'll see where they include, say, all registered voters. under the theory that he will turn out new voters that haven't historically voted. Of course, if we had 100% turnout in our elections, outcomes may be different, but only a fraction of Americans vote. And that's why elections are about turning out the vote. If O'Rourke manages to turn out a significant number of low propensity progressives and independents who support his campaign and haven't voted before, that can affect the outcome of an election. If the governor manages to turn out new voters in South Texas who have historically voted for the other side, then that's going to bode well for the governor. We won't know for sure until election, but all we have thus far is this polling. And right now, what we're seeing both in the polling and in the turnout numbers is that the O'Rourke campaign turnout effort is underperforming where it needs to be to achieve victory. So now let's look at the Texas legislature. In the Texas Senate, Kelsey mentioned we just went through redistricting. When they draw new lines, you tend to see the lines are drawn to typically favor one party or another, and you tend to see less hotly contested races in an election right after redistricting than you do 6 or 8 years out. There's really only one contested Texas Senate race. That is down in South Texas. It's a seat that's been held, deep South Texas, Cameron County. It's a seat that's been held by Senator Eddie Lucio for decades. And both the president and O'Rourke have a popularity issue in South Texas right now. We can talk about why that is, but they do. That has given some Republicans optimism to think that they have a real shot at picking up a seat in traditionally blue South Texas. However, the Democrats have fielded a really serious and well-funded candidate in Morgan LaMantia. She's been working incredibly hard. That race is considered to be a toss-up. We'll see what the outcome is. If you force me to make a bet on it, I think LaMantia pulls it off. I think that it's going to be difficult. Senator Lucio, by the way, has endorsed her. So I think it's going to be really difficult for that seat to turn red, but we'll find out, in a week. In the Texas House, there's a few key vote races to watch. In San Antonio, there's an incumbent Republican Representative John Lujan who won a special election. He won the seat of Democratic Representative Leo Pacheco, who resigned midterm. That's how the Republican picked up that seat. He's in a very tight race. It's a priority race for the Speaker of the House, so he's very well funded. That's probably the number one battleground. The number two battleground is probably in Central Texas. There's a new seat in Williamson County where the Republican is Caroline Harris, who again has a lot of support from the Speaker. A little bit less well-known opponent, but Williamson County, as Austin and Travis County grow and the suburbs become, it used to be Williamson County and Hayes County were deep red. They're becoming more purple and even blue. So we'll see what happens in that race. In North Texas, the suburbs similarly are turning less red and more purple today. There's a couple of key races in the Dallas area. Representative Morgan Meyer, who's a top lieutenant to the Speaker of the House and the chairman of the Powerful Ways and Means Committee, which, by the way, is the committee where all tax bills go. So pretty important to TRA. He's always in a tight race, but he's always extremely well funded. He's up with a pretty significant TV buy, and it looks like he's going to be safe. And nearby Garland, there's Representative Angie Chen Button. She's a key ally for the TRA. She faces a very significant race. But Representative Chen Button is an incredible grassroots campaigner. She really, really works, particularly within the Asian community in her district, which is significant. And so, the partisan makeup of her district, in my opinion, tells you less than the demographic makeup, because she does a really good job of working her community. And I think she's probably okay, but that's a close race. A key race I know for the TRA in Collin County is former TRA staffer Jamie Jolly. Jamie's running a really hard race. She's in that part of Collin County, which used to be bright red, but now is looking a lot more purple. That race is also a priority for the Speaker of the House. We think that she pulls that off, but again, we'll find out on election day. So with turnout favoring the GOP, unless something significant happens between now and Tuesday, I think you'll see Republicans, gain in the Senate by probably 1 seat, and Republicans in the House increase from 83 to 87 seats. That outcome in the House, where the Speaker is elected by the membership of the House, means that Speaker Dade Phelan has almost zero chance of losing a material number of seats and remains firmly in control of that chamber. Of course, the Lieutenant Governor who presides over the Senate is elected statewide. And what does this all mean for TRA? In my opinion, it means for TRA and its members, the restaurants that are out there depending on TRA to get them help in the Texas Capitol. I think that means continuity. And given the fact that under Emily and Kelsey's leadership, the TRA just had the most successful legislative session, continuity should mean very good things for the TRA and Texas restaurants.
I agree. I love to have that note of optimism. It's not always we're optimistic this close to an election. And one of the questions I get all the time is sort of, well, what's going to change between now and the election, right? Are those numbers going to change? Are we suddenly going to see a big turnout? We never know for sure. Things happen. But I think it is very telling when you look at those numbers of who showed up to vote so far. They are down significantly compared to last year. And that's, in many ways, that's not surprising. This is a midterm election, meaning the president isn't on the ballot. And so it's very typical for, the party that's not in control of the White House to sort of see a resurgence. And you factor that in with really high inflation, a rocky economy, concerns about the border. And that's where you're seeing some of these impacts that Daniel was talking about. So Mindy, let's go over to you. Break this down for us, for the person who's just out there operating their restaurant. I was going to say like Charlie Guerin, but he's not a good example because he's in the legislature. But for the Charlies of the world that aren't in the legislature, what does that look like? What does this mean for us come January when we have to work with all these folks and get our agenda passed?
I think the name of the game is what Daniel said, and that is stability and predictability. When you're focusing on, we had the most successful session you've ever had in the history of TRA last session. Everybody wanted to help us. When politics are as volatile as they are nationally and locally, all the way down to the local level, and folks are fighting and more partisan, nothing brings people together like sitting around a table at their favorite restaurant. And, we were in the very desirable position of being, needing some things done that were nonpartisan. Everybody wanted to help us, and that was a great position to be in. We are in a really stable environment. I mean, as Daniel said, there will probably be a couple of pickups by the Republicans. There might be a couple of surprises, but for the most part, it's going to look pretty stable. I do think, and Daniel pointed out, there's going to be 5 new senators, maybe 5 or 6, 5. 3 of those are House members. So they're already House trained. They are not new to the game. There will be some changes in committee assignments in the Senate. I think there's still a couple of issues that Governor Patrick is trying to figure out where he wants to place and in whose chairmanship he wants to entrust those issues with. But for the most part, it's going to be a pretty stable environment for us, which is great. Even if we have people that aren't for us, which is not really the case, as long as you know where people are and you can predict their behavior, we can adapt and work around anything. So I think that don't know for sure what is in the cards for us as far as our entire legislative package yet, but there may be a committee chair that's new here or there, but for the most part, we're going to be in pretty good shape. 30 new members in the House is a lot. That's a really big class in the House, but not unusual after redistricting to have that much attrition and that much turnover. And I think we're mostly getting good trades. I don't think we're losing, oh my God, the entire, stalwart bill passers in the House are all retiring. We're losing some good members, but we've got some great candidates. Like Daniel talked about, Jamie Jolly comes from us. She's one of ours. So there's some really Chamber of Commerce, local business type of people that make a paycheck like you guys every 2 weeks, we're getting some of those that are coming in. So I think we're really good, well positioned going in.
I think so too. Yeah, you mentioned Jamie. She has deep roots with the TRA. John Lujan has run a restaurant before. We love to see that. We were proud to endorse him in his reelection bid. There's quite a few actually, sort of restaurateurs or former restaurateurs who are either in the ledge now or coming in, which we love to see. So just in terms of kind of timeline and what this looks like, right? We've got early voting for the rest of the week. Anyone in Texas is eligible to vote early if you're eligible to vote. I'll drop the link in the chat, where to find that basic information about what's on your ballot, where your polling place is, all that good stuff. As soon as the election's over, we start bill filing, which means that any of the folks who are in the legislature and returning can go ahead and start filing the legislation that they want considered come January. And then obviously in January is when we will start this 6-month sprint. Allison, let's tap into your deep knowledge of the Texas House, because the House and the Senate are very different in terms of leadership and style. We've got the speaker elected by the members versus Lieutenant Governor Patrick. He's in charge of the Senate. He's elected by all of us. What do kind of those early days of session look like? What should we expect given kind of the outcomes that we're expecting in this election?
Well, to piggyback off what Daniel and Mindy have said, right now, between now and next Tuesday, if a lot of House members don't have races, they're out working for the ones that do.
Yep.
That's just kind of the way House members roll. They're block walking and standing at polls for their fellow House members. As soon as that election is over, everyone will hit the ground running. You can start pre-filing legislation. And that kind of gives you an idea early on some of the priorities to some of the members. Yep. That's not to say that, if a bill isn't filed in those early days, that it's not a priority or it doesn't have a great shot of becoming law. It's just kind of how the game starts off. And as we get into session, we will see, a change in committees, how those are made up. There will be, I believe, continuity in the leadership in the House and of course the Senate. But I think you'll see enough changes that it will be substantial, and it'll be things that hopefully as a team we navigate really well.
We will navigate it really well, Allison.
We will navigate it. But yes, there will be a lot of, running around and meeting with members and educating them on our issues. But luckily the TRA is, so well respected, and Kelsey does such a great job. I think that we will have really friendly ears and offices that we can rely on to help, carry the ball for us.
Yeah, that's right. We've been busy this year, as everyone watching knows, between our road trip where we've met with dozens of elected officials. We had a bunch of officials come to our PAC lounge, which was great. All of that work is really key because, as Allison said, once this election's over, we all hit the ground. It's 0 to 60 kind of overnight. And so you really have to come to the legislative session prepared, knowing who your friends are, knowing who your champions are, and knowing what you're asking of them, because things move so fast and furious. So yeah, once session starts, there's been a couple mention of committees. So Lieutenant Governor Patrick has kind of complete discretion over who is appointed to what committees. There are only 31 senators, so really all of them get important committee assignments because they're just, are so many committees and aren't that many senators. We tend to work the most in business and commerce, which is currently chaired by Senator Schwartner. We expect him to keep that chair. That's where all of our alcohol bills go, our regulatory bills. Most of our bills that we care about in the Senate are over in business and commerce. There's also Senate Finance, which deals with the budget and any kind of tax bills. Senator Huffman is chair of that committee. She is very familiar with our industry, and we expect her to keep that chair as well. So we're very excited to work with her. Then over in the House, it's 150 members. They choose the speaker. As Daniel and others have said, Speaker Phelan has a very strong position. We certainly don't expect any surprises there. He'll make the committee assignments. There's a lot of House committees we work with. They tend to be more focused on fewer issues because there's so many members over there. So everything from public health to licensing and administrative procedures, which is where our alcohol bills go. Ways and means, as Daniel said, is tax bills. Appropriations is the budget. So lots of committees over there we work with. For the most part, they are chaired by pretty senior members that we expect to be back and to have, positions of authority. And so we look forward to continuing those relationships, which are so important over there. The other thing we'll see in the House, which will kind of set the tone, at least to some extent for this session, is the House and Senate will vote on their rules for the session. For those kind of political junkies like me, that's a good kind of indication on what the tone is going to be. Are people going to work together in a bipartisan fashion? Are things a little bit more personal and fraught with difficulty? So we'll see how those discussions go. But like I said, that kind of helps you understand if things are going to be kind of more bipartisan or a little more dysfunctional like we see up in DC all the time. So that's kind of like the roadmap of where we're heading. Mindy, we were talking the other day, for those, who are going to be watching the election night returns come in, some question about Harris County. They have a history of being a little slower to count and report their results. And it's obviously a huge county, so that could have a big impact on some of these statewide races. What are you hearing out of Harris County? And are there anything like that we should be kind of on the lookout for on election day to get a read of where the results are going to be?
That's a good question, Kelsey. And Harris County is always a big question mark. Whether you lever or don't lever, Lena Hidalgo is a controversial county judge. They have had a lot going on in their elections division. They're having a hard time keeping an election official employed over there. And they're still in an argument with the Attorney General's office about their audit from the last election. So that county judge race has actually gotten a lot of attention. And I do think if there's anything close in Harris County, and I don't know how many pages the ballot are, but the ballot in Harris County is probably 20 pages plus long. But if there's any controversy or any races that are close in Harris County, I think it could very well send the Harris County election results into a tailspin that could last a couple of days or end up in a lawsuit. So I think that Daniel's numbers are right on point on the statewide and the separation, I think, that is happening on those statewide races. So I'm not really expecting a lot of controversy there, but I do think some of the down ballot races that could be closer might be undecided for a few days. There's some of those open seats that I don't think are going to be controversial, but you never know. And so I do think Harris County, whether you love them or don't, I think it could be a few days all the way to a lawsuit before we know the truth.
Yeah. And just as a reminder, Texas got rid of the straight party voting, right? So you can't go in anymore and just click, I want to vote all Republican, I want to vote all Democrat. And this election, those ballots are going to be really long because of so many people on the race. And you got to remember too, we're not really talking about judicial races, but tons and tons of judicial races will be on the ballot as well.
That's a good point. I'm going to jump in, Kelsey,
Yeah.
because your ballot is long. I would encourage you guys to educate yourselves on some of those judicial races, because those races are absolutely important. If you think that they're not making policy through court action, they are. And so, try to educate yourself as best you can before you go to the polls. I know Kelsey probably has some more resources she can send out, but it's daunting, and you can't just pull a trigger and vote one party anymore. You gotta work through it.
That's absolutely right. I find it hard to keep track of all the judicial races, and this is my job, and I'm a lawyer. So, don't be afraid to ask questions, because none of us know all these candidates, but there are organizations that vet them. And the judicial races are incredibly important, as Mindy mentioned. We're a partner to the Texas Business Roundtable and the Texas Civil Justice League. And we have their endorsements. They've screened all of these judicial candidates. So I can absolutely get that information out to anyone who is interested. We also obviously have our list of candidates that the TRA has either endorsed or given money to through our PAC. So, please request that information as well if it's of interest to you. And then our chapters have endorsed in several local races as well. I'm here in Austin. The Austin chapter endorsed Kirk Watson, who I think the world of, to be mayor of this town. We've also endorsed Jerry Morales, previous president of the TRA. He's running to be the mayor of Midland. There's a few others as well. I can't emphasize enough that those local races are incredibly important. The Texas legislature only meets every other year for 6 months. Normally, sometimes we have little extra innings. Your city council is meeting every week and they have some really good ideas and some really bad ideas. So, please make sure you're engaged with your local chapter and really giving those local races a thorough consideration as well. Let's just kind of wrap things up by talking about, the TRA PAC, what it is, why it's important. Would love to get our lobbyists' take on this, but hopefully y'all already know since you're here, but the TRA PAC is our political action committee. It is how we contribute to folks who are running for office in the state of Texas. So we have a board of trustees made up of restaurant operators who screen candidates and make decisions about who we should endorse or contribute to. We can only accept personal funds because of ethics laws. We have to report everything. It's very transparent, but it really is a way for our industry to band together and speak with one voice on these elections so that we make sure we're working with people who understand our industry, understand the importance of it, and are willing to listen to us, frankly, when we go up to the Capitol. We've made it really easy to contribute to the PAC. The easiest thing is to sign up for a recurring contribution, so I never have to nag you again, or at least until your credit card expires, which does happen, but at least buys you a few years. You can sign up for monthly, quarterly, or annual payments. It's a great way to just make sure that you're continuing to invest in our industry. And I think that's the key word. It's an investment. We had the best session we've ever had last session, but there are always new challenges, new things we need to accomplish. So I like to talk about it as paying it forward. If you got a PPP loan last year, if you sold any alcohol to go, if you've sold groceries during the pandemic, any of that, just take a little bit of that money you made, reinvest it in the PAC so we can keep delivering results moving forward. Daniel, Mindy, Allison, anything to add on the PAC and why it's important to be engaged?
Yeah, I'll cite two examples. One, we've talked about Jamie Jolly. Obviously, she's in a tight race. She's a first-time candidate. The TRA was early to endorse her, to support her financially. She is going to be an ally for restaurants. She loves Texas restaurants. She wants to support restaurants. This is an opportunity through the PAC to help get a member of the legislature who's really going to get and understand the issues that restaurateurs are facing. I'll give that example. Second example is State Representative Justin Holland. Justin liked his restaurants, didn't know a heck of a lot about them, but he knew all of his local restaurateurs and he liked them. During the third special session, when we were working to obtain some ARPA dollars to provide some relief to restaurants, we called Justin Holland and said, hey, you're on appropriations. Would you be willing to try to get us a bucket of money? We literally ran over to the Capitol and were making law on it wasn't quite the back of a restaurant napkin, but it was the back of a piece of paper. He offered an amendment on the floor and millions of dollars were made available to Texas restaurants. He then faced a tight Republican primary when he was seeking re-election. and we were able to help him. And we were able to help somebody who is a demonstrated champion for restaurants to make sure that he comes back. Within the Republican Party, unfortunately, at this point right now, economic incentive programs have become controversial for some. And so when you've got a member of the legislature who will really stick their neck out there to help Texas restaurants, we couldn't do that without the PAC, and we couldn't show that support for somebody who's willing to stick his neck out for the Restaurant Association if we didn't have the PAC and the people who generously support the PAC.
To
Well
put that in
said.
perspective, the Jamie Jolly race, through the course of her primary, her runoff, and the general election, she's spending $3 million for a $600 a month job. So, and there's also, Jane Fonda was in Austin, Texas last week and opened her checkbook to a bunch of people. I know that Beto had a fundraiser at Sarah Jessica Parker and Matthew Broderick's home in New York City. So there's a lot of outside money influencing these races that are very deep pockets, and these are expensive races. So you guys are their constituents. When we put a PAC check in somebody's hand, that's local, and that matters to these members. So we appreciate that y'all are trying to run a business, but it's really nice to be able to walk in with some love for these folks to help them get elected.
Absolutely. Allison, anything to add on that?
Yeah, I mean, it costs a lot of money to run these races, and you can't adequately educate yourself on a lot of these down ballot races and candidates without the mail pieces and without the website and advertising that you do see that kind of help you understand who it is that you're voting for. So it is just something to keep in mind, that these are very expensive races because it costs a lot of money to do this. And, that doesn't even begin to take into consideration the personal time and time away from families and away from jobs and all of those things that it takes to make a return on that investment.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. I know I tell y'all all the time that these races get more and more expensive, but that Jamie Jolly example is exactly right. I mean, that's to be a Texas House member, and that's $3 million. You look at the numbers for the governor's race. I mean, it's insane.
In excess of 200 million so far.
Yeah. So, they're incredibly expensive. And to Mindy's point, it's not just about the money. It's the fact that these elected officials know this money came from their people, right? Their voters, the people they're going to see when they go back home, the restaurants they're going to visit. And that matters. It absolutely matters. The other thing I'll say, and you'll know this, but we're a nonpartisan organization. We're very proud of the fact that we work with legislators and lawmakers of all political stripes and parties. Everyone loves restaurants. There are causes we care about that are important to everyone. I don't care what your background is. And so, you can rest assured that your investment in the PAC is not a partisan investment. It's truly an investment in the future of our industry and the legal and regulatory changes we need to be stronger. So I think we've kind of covered it, unless there are any last minute questions, or team, if I forgot anything. All right, well, I put in the chat the link to votetexas.gov. It's a great one-stop shop to make sure you're ready to vote. You know where you're voting, you know how you're voting. And email me if you have a question about PAC contributions, our endorsements, any of that, and I'll be happy to get it to you. Lupita, I'll follow up with you directly. Thank you so much for that. And just thank you, everyone. It's really important work. It's not cheap work, but it's important work, and we're really honored that we get to do it, if I can speak for the whole team. All right. Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.